I cover a lot of crime cases every day and this one gave me nightmares. This is the terrifying CCTV image captured outside a family home before they all vanished into thin air. Shortly before this, they'd claimed that their house was haunted. It was October 2009 in beautiful Eufaula, Oklahoma. The Jamison family of 3 seemed like a totally normal family unit to anyone who saw them posting on social media. Bobby Dale Jamison lived in a modest house with his wife, Sherry Lynn, and they had a sweet little girl together. This was 6-year-old Madison Stormy Star Jamison. But if covering true crime cases has taught me anything, it's to never believe anything you see on social media. No one could have ever predicted what was about to happen next. Behind the scenes, things weren't so picture perfect. It's believed that Sherry Lynn had struggled with her mental health and had even had a son from a previous relationship who preferred to live with his dad because he said his mum was so depressed. Also, sorry if you can hear thunder outside. I feel like the thunder has just started and it's just adding to like the creepy effects. Those close to the family knew that they had some concerns about the property that they lived in. They believed that the house was haunted by spirits, and family had even agreed that they said the house just had this awful energy. Anybody who would ever go over just felt like as soon as they left, they just felt really depressed. The dad had once claimed that he saw 2 to 4 ghosts on the roof, and they'd even had a pastor over to try and get rid of the evil spirits. And the Jamison family, feeling so strongly about their house, had actually planned to move into a storage unit instead. And this was obviously not welcomed by the neighbours. I mean, it was a total eyesore. Sherry Lynn had also started spraying some kind of weird messages on it about witches and had put "the neighbours are poisoning our cats" on the side. On the 8th of the month, they seemingly set out in their car, and in CCTV footage that was found later, they were captured in almost this kind of like zombie-like state, I would say. They were walking back and forth, back and forth, back and forth to the car. I believe it was around 20 times, and this would have been normal if they were maybe packing up the car for a trip and were sort of carrying like a lot of stuff back and forth, but it didn't seem like they were really carrying much of anything at all. They then drove off and seemingly vanished. That was until just days later when their family truck was found a few hours away from the home. Upsettingly, inside was the malnourished family dog who had just sat there waiting for his owners to come back, and they never had. There was also the couple's IDs inside the vehicle along with their phones and purses. A very, very bizarre discovery was also made inside. There was $32,000 in cash, and no one could understand why on earth they either had that amount of money or had it in cash withdrawn with them. It wasn't really clear from the scene whether the family had been forced out of the car or had left of their own accord. The money hadn't been touched. It kind of didn't make sense either way, because you feel like if the family had been forced out of the car, surely things would have been stolen that were worth some money. But if the family left of their own accord, surely they would have made sure that they secured the vehicle and also would have taken the money with them. The mystery of where the family vanished to rumbled on for years until 2013. That November, some hunters had come across skeletal remains just 3 miles from where the car had been found. They were sent off for analysis and eventually confirmed to be all 3 of the missing family members. Now, frustratingly, due to the decomposition that had occurred, they weren't even able to tell how they died. It's just added to the mystery of the whole situation. Honestly, I feel like nothing really makes sense here. There are a number of disturbing theories out there though. One includes maybe a murder self-unaliving. Potentially both of the parents were suffering from some kind of psychosis or something, took themselves off to unalive themselves and the daughter. But that doesn't really explain the £32,000. Some also speculated whether Bobby's dad was involved due to the fact that they'd had a bit of a strained relationship and he tried to take out a restraining order against his dad because of some alleged threats. The dad was apparently in poor health though and died shortly after the family went missing. It's also speculated that they may have just got lost and died of natural causes, maybe, that they succumbed to the elements, but that doesn't explain why they'd leave their phones in the car and take such a large sum of money with them. Let me know your theories in the comments.
This has to be one of the craziest unsolved murder cases I've ever covered on this page. This is the case of Dorothy Jane Scott. Hi Meg, I talk about true crime. Let's get into the weird details surrounding this case. Dorothy Jane Scott was a 32-year-old single mother living in Stanton, California. Her son's name was Sean and he was only 4 years old. Sean's father didn't live in the area, so Dorothy's parents would help her take care of him when she was at work. Dorothy was one of those girls who preferred to stay at home. She was a devout Christian and she didn't really drink or do drugs. Months before she went missing, she started getting really strange phone calls. There was no caller ID or anything. It was an anonymous man who would call and proclaim his love for her. And then he would follow up by telling her he wanted to kill her. It was all very strange at first, but she didn't take it that seriously until one day he called and told her to look outside her house because there was a gift for her. According to Dorothy's mother, who was there at the time, she went outside and there was a single dead rose on her window shield, meaning whoever this was knew where she lived. The calls got worse and worse and more graphic, and he would start to describe to her how he wanted to cut her up into bits and how he would get her alone and murder her. May 28th, 1980, it was a normal workday for Dorothy. That's until she noticed that one of her colleagues named Conrad didn't look too well and he had a strange mark on his arm. So Dorothy and another coworker named Pam took Conrad to the hospital. Dorothy made a quick stop to her house to check up on her son before they went to the hospital, and she changed her scarf from black to red. This is important for later. Turns out her colleague had been bit by a black widow spider, which is awful, terrifying, but not as terrifying as what happens next. Throughout this entire visit, Dorothy did not leave Conrad's side once, according to Pam. He got discharged at around 11 p.m. and so they were leaving, and Dorothy offered to bring the car around so he didn't have to walk because he wasn't doing so good. He was still quite unwell. According to everyone, she was an extremely caring person, and you can just see it through this story. Conrad and Pam stood waiting for Dorothy to bring the car around, but she never came, and it was taking quite a while. They decided to check out a separate parking lot to make sure that maybe there wasn't any confusion. That's when suddenly her car came speeding towards them with the headlights on, so they didn't actually see who was in the car. They then started waving, trying to get her attention. Maybe she would stop, but she didn't. She just drove off. They thought it was a little strange, but they assumed that maybe there was a sudden emergency with her son or something, so they kind of brushed it off. That's until a few hours later when they realized that no one had actually heard from Dorothy, so the police were called at that point. At 4:30 a.m. the next morning, her car was found burning in an alley. It was about 16 kilometers away from the hospital. About a week into Dorothy's disappearance, her parents started getting phone calls from the same man who was calling her before. He would call almost every single Wednesday night and say something along the lines of, "I've got her, she's with me, I've taken her." The calls were never long enough to actually trace where they were coming from, and it was the 80s, so the technology wasn't as good as it is today. On the 12th of June 1980, the same man calls the Orange County Register. They were publishing papers about the case, and according to them, he said, "I killed her. I killed Dorothy Scott. She was my love. I caught her cheating with another man. She denied having someone else. I killed her." According to people in Dorothy's life, she wasn't seeing anyone at the time, nor was she really on the dating scene. According to the people who took the call, the guy on the phone knew about the spider bite at the hospital. And he also knew that Dorothy had swapped her scarf from a black scarf to a red scarf before leaving, which were two details that the police had not released to the public. After that phone call, there were no other developments in the case, and it kind of started going cold. That's until 4 years later in 1984. A construction worker came across the remains of a dog, and when he dug further underneath those remains, there were human remains. The dog's remains were said to be there to deter sniffer dogs from finding the human remains underneath. As you can probably guess, the body was Dorothy's. They identified her using dental records. They were never able to determine what the actual cause of death was, though. A strange detail, though, is that a watch was found on her, and the time stopped exactly an hour after she was last seen by her coworkers outside the hospital. It's as if her watch stopped the moment she died. After the remains were found, the calls started up again, claiming to be the person who was responsible for this. But once again, they were never able to track who was calling. This man who was calling was untraceable and is probably still out there today, which is terrifying. But something like this with the calls would not be able to happen today. He would be caught. That is everything they have on this case, and it's been 39 years since her body was found. Cases like these have been solved years and years and years later, so maybe this will be one of them, but for now it remains unsolved. I wish I could give you a list of suspects, but there is no suspects in this case, except for that anonymous stalker on the other end of the phone. That's it for today's video. Let me know what you think of the case in the comments, and make sure you tell me what case you want me to cover next. Thanks for watching. Bye.
You're laughing at yourself.
Yeah, but I can't do it when you just stood there.
I'm not stood anywhere. I'm lying down reading my book peacefully.
Say,
Woman up.
woman up.
Yep.
You got anything to say? Oh.
It was March 2010 when a couple pulled up to the Budget Lodge Inn near Memphis. Now, as the name suggests, the couple weren't expecting glamour. It's very basic to say the least, but you would at least expect at the bare minimum the place to be clean. So when this couple checked in and they wheeled their cases into the room, they were like, "What is that smell?" They weren't the first guests to complain about this. For weeks, different sets of couples had checked in, complained about the smell, got the cleaning staff in to do a once-over and spray a bit of Febreze, and then checked out. The manager of the hotel even sent staff in to shampoo the carpets, but the smell still remained. Now, finally, after weeks and weeks of this, it had gone on for so long when it became unbearable. The housekeeping manager finally pulled the mattress out and found the body of a woman hidden in the bed frame, and obviously called police. Months earlier, a loving mother of 5 had been reported missing in the area. This was Sunny Millbrook. She failed to pick her kids up on the 27th of January, which was unheard of. She was an amazing mum. She would never just not show up of her own accord. And by now, her family had gone 6 entire weeks having no idea where she'd vanished to. It was like she'd just disappeared off the face of the earth. Police identified the woman in the bed frame as Sunny, and when they started looking into her background, they felt a chill down their spine. The baby dad of 4 of Sunny's children was an incredibly violent man. This was Lakeith Moody. Now, they'd been together for absolutely years. Way back 10 years prior, police had been called to the local hospital where they saw Sunny covered in bruises. This man had beaten her to a pulp, almost knocked her tooth out, and choked her unconscious. It truly was a miracle that she was still alive. 2008, Sunny's employer got a terrifying text off her in a separate incident. She told her manager she was being held hostage in her own home. When police raced over there, they knocked on the door and got no reply, and thank God they decided to take the initiative to break down the door. His inside was a terrified Sunny and her 3 children cowering in the corner. He had choked Sunny out with a baby blanket and threatened her that next time he'd kill her. It makes me so upset that nothing was done. These horrific events kept happening, this horrifying violence, and this man was just free to do it again. There were so many missed opportunities, so many times she was beaten, she was battered, and now she was dead. The security guard at the hotel did tell police that he saw Lakeith with Sunny arguing when they checked in. Witnesses also reported hearing screaming coming from their room. But nobody thought, actually, maybe with the woman going missing and the bad smell in the room and the screaming, like maybe this is all linked. Lakeith was thankfully caught on CCTV using Sunny's benefits card just 4 days after she'd vanished, and he was driving around in her vehicle. He also lied to police about the last time he'd seen Sunny, and the forensic team found his DNA under her fingernails. She'd tried to fight back, bless her. He was thankfully given life in prison, but I can't imagine those poor children losing both parents in just such a traumatic way. Your dad's suddenly in prison for being a murderer, and your mum is the victim.
Over 50 years ago, this married couple left a cocktail party and were never seen again. This is the very strange disappearance of Stefania and Edward Andrews. Stefania and Edward Andrews lived in Arlington Heights, a suburb of Chicago, Illinois. Both were 62 years old and had been married for about 6 to 7 years. Those who knew them described the couple as hardworking, outgoing, and friendly. They weren't heavy drinkers or gamblers, but loved entertaining and socializing with friends. By all accounts, they enjoyed each other's company and led this relatively simple yet happy life. Edward was originally from North Dakota. After high school, he joined the Navy and served until 1927. Over the years, he moved across the country, living in Ohio, Pennsylvania, California, and Missouri, before finally settling in Chicago. Along the way, he adopted 2 children with one of his ex-wives, and his marital history was a bit complex. His sister later revealed that Edward had been married between 6 and 7 times before meeting Stefania. Now, Stefania was born Stefania Reinach. She had at least one brother and had been married once before, about 16 years prior to marrying Edward. Sadly, not much is known about her life. By 1970, the couple had stable careers. Stefania had worked as a credit investigator for over 20 years, and Edward was an office manager and bookkeeper. Both were looking forward to retiring by the end of the year. On the morning of May 15th, 1970, Edward and Stefania followed their usual routine. They hopped into their black and yellow 1969 Oldsmobile and headed to work. Edward did not like the confusion of expressways, so every morning they took a familiar route, Northwest Highway to US Highway 14, then on to Lakeshore Drive straight into the city center. That morning was no different. Edward dropped Stefania off at her job before continuing on to his own. Around noon, Edward left work to grab lunch with a couple of colleagues, but something was very clearly off. He looked noticeably pale, complained about feeling unwell, and didn't touch any of his food. After lunch, he drove one of his coworkers to the train station before heading back to the office. Later, a colleague mentioned to the president of the company that Edward looked really sick. At one point, he was even seen resting his head in his hands, clearly struggling. But it didn't matter how sick Edward felt. He and Stefania had plans for that evening. Stefania's supervisor had given her 2 tickets to the Allied Beverage cocktail party at the Sheraton Chicago Hotel, and they were not going to miss it. So despite Edward feeling under the weather earlier, the couple arrived at the hotel between 5:30 and 6 p.m., appearing to be in good spirits. Throughout the evening, they mingled, enjoyed cocktails, and chatted with other guests, but several people noticed that Edward did not look well. He even mentioned that he was hungry, yet the couple stayed at the party until around 9:30 p.m. Edward and Stefania left the party that night. They took the elevator down to the hotel's garage. The parking manager, Anthony Morelli, immediately noticed that something was wrong. Edward was staggering, clearly struggling, and Stefania was in tears. The two got into their car and started to leave, but Edward hit the garage exit door, forcing him to stop and reposition the vehicle. At that point, Anthony approached the car and told Edward he shouldn't be driving, and Stefania, who was still crying, gave a small nod in agreement. But Edward ignored the warning. He sped out of the garage, going the wrong way into Michigan Avenue's lower level. And that was the last time that anyone saw Edward and Stefania Andrews. The couple seemingly vanished Friday night, and by Monday, coworkers grew concerned when neither of them showed up for work. When police conducted a welfare check at Edward and Stefania's home, a neighbor with a key let them inside, and it quickly became clear that no one had likely been in that house since the couple left for work on the morning of May 15th. The breakfast dishes were still sitting on the table, their clothes and suitcases remained untouched, and there was no sign of a struggle. At the time of their disappearance, Edward and Stefania had $140 in cash and about 14 credit cards, but none of those cards had been used since they went missing. Police were at a loss as to what had happened. They checked parking lots, hospitals, morgues, and accident reports, even issuing a nationwide alert with the Andrews car and license plate number, but nothing came up. Even their friends and family were confused. They had no idea where Edward and Stefania would have gone. They wouldn't have just left town without telling anyone. They would have notified at least their employers. Edward's sister later said that the last time she spoke to him was about 3 months before the disappearance. Edward would typically visit her once a month, but he hadn't shown up in several. With very few leads to go on, police began to theorize that after leaving the parking garage, he mistakenly turned south into the wrong lane on Lower Michigan Avenue, crossed the Michigan Avenue Bridge, and possibly realized his error too late, attempting a U-turn on a stretch of road without guardrails and accidentally driving the car into the Chicago River. But the river was dragged multiple times over the years, sonar equipment was used, and scuba divers found nothing. Because the river at that point was only 16 feet deep, deep and the current was weak, police didn't believe it was possible that something as large as a car could have just been washed away. But there was nothing to indicate that the couple had skipped town. They only had $140 in cash, which in today's money would be a little over $1,000, but still, none of their credit cards had been touched since their disappearance. By 1973, 3 years after their disappearance, an Arlington Heights detective speculated that a barge might have crushed the car into the bottom of the river or pushed it into the lake, but again, many searches over the years have turned up nothing. Many cars have been pulled from the Chicago River over the past 50 years, but none of them have ever been Stefania and Edward's. In 1994, an informant came forward to say that he knew exactly what had happened to Edward and Stefania. In fact, he had witnessed it. This informant said that when he was about 12 to 13 years old, he witnessed a gang called the Lake Forest Losers kill Edward and Stefania, then place their bodies into their own car and dump the car into a pond near Green Oaks. This was the only lead police had in years, but a search of the pond failed to turn up anything. No bodies, no car, and no reason as to why the Lake Forest Losers would want to kill Edward and Stefania. They weren't extremely wealthy, they weren't known to involve themselves in any kind of criminal activity, and it just didn't make any sense. It has been over 50 years since Stefania and Edward Andrews left that cocktail party one night in 1970 and simply vanished without a trace. I am very interested to hear all of your thoughts and theories on this case. Let me know in the comments what you think, and I can't wait to discuss this case with you. Personally, when I first looked at this case, I thought that maybe Edward had wrecked the car into the river, but the fact that many other surrounding bodies of water have been searched and nothing has come up, it's just very odd. If you have made it to the end of this video, I appreciate you. None of this would be possible without every single one of you. I appreciate all of your support, and I can't wait to see you in another video.
Trigger warning, if you don't do good with gruesome cases, I'd leave now. The year is 2010. We're in Sweden in the small town of Skara. Something unspeakable is about to happen, something that would haunt an entire country, and no one would carry that weight longer or more painfully than a 9-year-old little girl named Jamie Lee. But to backtrack to 1978, when in Sweden, a baby by the name of Jamie Daniel was born. He later changed his name to Isakin Dubred, and he had a very tough upbringing. From what we know, which isn't much, but it sounds like even throughout his childhood, there were signs that he would more than likely be heading down the wrong path. It also wasn't uncommon for him to be constantly in and out of different mental institutions, and he did go down the wrong path. As he grew up, he got involved with the wrong people, started committing petty crimes, and got in trouble with the law several times for theft and other offenses. By 2009, when he was in his 30s, he found himself at a psychiatric clinic, and it was there that he met a woman called, I'm going to try to pronounce this correctly. I've watched so many videos about this case and I'm trying my best. Her name is Hella Christensen, and the two of them had a ton in common. They both struggled with mental health issues. They both had a criminal history and previous past convictions. Both of them were also parents. Hella had multiple children who lived with their father. She did not have custody of any of them. And Isakin had a daughter that he stayed in touch with. So the two of them start a relationship. They both get out of the psychiatric clinic, and sooner than later, Hella is introduced to Isakin's daughter, Jamie Lee. And Jamie adored Hella. They had a very close relationship. She definitely saw her more as a second mother rather than just her father's girlfriend. But because she loved her so much, it only made it that much harder for Jamie to sit through and witness the constant arguments that happened between her and her dad. Isakin and Hella arguing loudly and passionately was a common thing, and when they got into it, they got into it. It was never just a disagreement. Even if it was something that started off small, it escalated into a lot of yelling and throwing things around the room and saying things to each other that you should never say to a person that you claim to love. In regards to the dynamic, Jamie has described the relationship between her dad and his girlfriend as a toxic horror movie one. And it sounds like Jamie did live primarily with her biological mother, but she was often at Isakin and Hella's apartment to spend time with both of them as well. And growing up with Isakin as her dad was very different for Jamie, because as a child, it felt like Jamie Lee lived in two separate worlds. She described her mother's home to be loving and normal, but when it came time for her to visit her dad, she experienced the dark side. There was never any light in his apartment, and I mean that literally and figuratively. Isakin had a fascination with the devil, and his apartment was decorated with pictures and drawings of the devil and demons. Jamie's time spent with him felt like a lot of psychological manipulation, horror movies, and brainwashing sessions, because Isakin would often talk about the dark side and about how he wanted Jamie to experience it with him. He was constantly playing scary, gory movies that he would force her to watch. Another example is that he would want her to see the demons and the spirits that he said were watching her, and he would make her stare at something in the room asking if she could see them. She would say no, and remember, this is a little girl. She would say no, but then Isakin would encourage her to try harder, to think harder, until she would agree that she saw them. One time when she was little as well, she was sleeping over at his place. They were both in her bedroom. He was sitting on her bed and they were about to go to sleep when he looked at her and asked her, "What would you do if you heard me calling your name from the kitchen right now?" You would realize that it wasn't me sitting behind you right now. It would be something or someone else. Saying that it would be like a demon actually sitting behind her if her dad was in reality in the kitchen. And Jamie was like, "What? Dad, don't say that." And Isakin just thought it was hilarious. He just started laughing. Jamie Lee has also said like it felt like her father wanted her to be afraid of him or of something else or of both. And don't get me wrong, she would say that she loved her father and she thought that he loved her back as well more than anything in the world. The two of them did have some happy memories together, but there was just this dark side about him that he would talk about all the time and that kind of just took over everything in his life. And when something happened that would trigger him and make him angry, Jamie knew that she had valid reasons to be afraid of her dad. She learned to be scared of her father at a very, very young age. She has said that when he got angry, it was like his eyes would go black and she would look at him and all she would see was anger and evil. She didn't even recognize her dad when that happened. November 12th of 2010 was an ordinary Friday in Skara, and the day started off like any other. Isakin and Hel woke up around noon. They got dressed. They went out shopping together. When they got home later in the day, Jamie Lee went over to see them. And as soon as she went over there, she could tell immediately that something was off. Isakin wasn't speaking. Hel wasn't speaking. She wasn't even speaking to Jamie, which was very, very weird because remember, the two of them had a pretty close relationship. Jamie Lee sat down and Hella started preparing food and cooking in the kitchen, and when the food was ready, she handed it over to her and said, quote, "Enjoy this. It's the last meal I will ever cook for you because Isakin is going to," end quote. Chills went down Jamie Lee's spine, but what was she supposed to do? She was 9 years old. She was scared of her dad and also confused as to what really was going on. Jamie's mom ended up picking her up from the apartment that night, thankfully, but that was the last time that she would ever see Hella alive again. Once it was just the two of them in the apartment, Hella went over to lie down on a mattress to rest. Isakin then took a nap in the kitchen, walked over to Hella and sat on her shoulders, and then he her throat. Hella did not have time to resist. She didn't have time to fight back. She was gone almost immediately. But he did not stop there. And again, trigger warning, very graphic. He didn't stop there because then he removed a lot of body parts into separate pieces, including the head. He then walked over to the kitchen area and he cooked them. He prepared them to eat them. He fried them in a frying pan and then he ate them. He ate a lot of them. The man who had once been Jamie Lee's dad had become something else entirely. And shockingly, after he was done committing the crime and after he was done eating, he called the police to tell them what he had just done, saying that once they show up, they wouldn't have to use any force to arrest him because he was as calm as could be. He also stated, quote, "I want to do the right thing for myself. What I have done now, I have no idea that I actually done it, but I have woken up," end quote. Police officers were then dispatched to the apartment where he was taken into custody. When they questioned him, he confessed to everything, saying that he was a dangerous person when he was off of his medication and he knew that. And he described the events that happened like a movie, saying that he didn't know why he did it, only that he felt like there were multiple people in the apartment at the time and it felt like a movie scene to him. I will spare you the details of that crime scene, but whatever you're imagining in your head, make it 10 times worse. I mean, there are not pictures of the crime scene online, at least that I could find, thankfully, but 9-year-old Jamie Lee found out about what her father did in a way that no child, no person ever should. She accidentally saw the newspaper and she stared at a word that she did not yet understand. It was her mom that told her about Hella first, and when she told her that she was gone, her entire world came crashing down because she loved her. She loved her like a second mom. And Jamie Lee, as soon as her mother told her, she knew that her father had done it. She knew that her father was behind it. She had seen them fight. She had seen him angry. She had heard the things that he would yell and talk about, and she just knew. So she asked her mom if it was her dad, and her mom just said yes, refusing to give her any details. It was when she saw the headlines the next day that she realized that things were so much worse and so much more brutal and gruesome than she could have ever imagined. Quote, "I accidentally saw the newspapers. I did not know what the word meant, but when I was 13, I read some articles and then I understood what the word meant. But by then, my dad had me wrapped around his finger. He made himself the good person and his girlfriend was the villain. He brainwashed me to believe that," end quote. So like I said, Isakin was arrested almost immediately and he fully confessed. The following day, a forensic psychiatric evaluation was ordered and those results showed that he was very, very mentally ill. They also showed that with his illnesses, he suffered from a ton of side effects, one of those being hallucinations. When police searched the apartment, they found all the evidence that they needed to be able to prove that everything that Isakin had confessed to was true, along with other eerie items that he kept inside of his apartment, such as a painting of a portrait of a man who had been feeding something dark in himself for a very long time. In 2011, he was found guilty and committed to a psychiatric facility rather than a conventional prison. From inside that institution, rather than reflecting on what he had done, what he kept his attention on was continuing to pull at Jamie Lee like a puppet master. He truly believed that him and his daughter Jamie had a purpose related to the dark side, and he would tell her, even if you don't see what I see now, you eventually will, and the demons will guide you, and you will become more powerful than I am. Those are the things that he was saying to her ever since she was a child, and he continued to talk about the same things even after he was convicted. Quote, my dad definitely brainwashed me and had done so since I was 3 years old. He has always exposed me to the dark side with the devil and demons and evil spirits, and that has always been a part of my reality, a part of my everyday life, end quote. Inside the institution, Isakin Dubred continued to be the same person he had always been. In December of 2011, he became engaged to another patient, a woman called Michelle, a woman known to the media as Vampire Woman, who had also been convicted, and an inmate at the same psychiatric hospital. Together, the two of them mockingly would make blogs and talk about their crimes like it was something funny, it was something that they were proud of from the hospital's computer, with absolutely no regret in regards to the terrible things that both of them had done, which then led to a motion in the Swedish parliament to prohibit internet use for patients inside of those Swedish psychiatric institutions. In 2017, Isakin made headlines again after selling voodoo dolls and other art containing bodily fluids. He was selling them online from inside the hospital. The voodoo dolls were made from toilet paper, toothpicks, and sewing thread, with the bodily fluids used to keep them all together. Meanwhile, his daughter Jamie Lee watched everything from the outside, trying to also heal from all the trauma that she had. She still struggled to understand why her dad was the way that he was, and she struggled heavily with anxiety and depression for many, many years going into her adulthood. Jamie did not see her father for 2 years after the crime, but she went down the wrong path a little bit because she didn't know how to deal with everything that she was feeling. And at that time, when she was at her most vulnerable, her dad managed to reel her back in. Because she wasn't being the best version of herself, her mom wasn't supporting the behavior that she was showing, but her dad was there to say, hey, I will love you, I will support you, and I hope that you grow up to be like me. So throughout her teenage years, she kept in contact with him until one incident where he became completely out of control and scared her so bad, showing Jamie that he had not changed. Then she cut off contact with him completely and focused on getting better herself. I think the little girl in her was clinging to this idea, this version of him that she needed him to be, because even after the crime, she still saw him as her dad, even though every headline and every newspaper was rightfully so painting him out to be this evil monster. It was October of 2024, 14 years after the crime, when Jamie Lee decided that she was ready to face her dad again. She walked into the facility to face her father. This was on camera. This is all filmed. You can watch it. Quote, he started crying and hugged me and seemed happy to see him. I so wanted to believe that he had changed and that he had become the dad that I always wanted and needed, end quote. But the man that she was hoping to find was not the man that was sitting across from her. He was still holding on to the same beliefs that he always had, in my opinion, very, very clearly mentally unwell still. And Jamie was older now. It's actually such a sad interview to watch because you can tell just like from what she's saying to him, the way that she's looking at him, that she wants him to be better so badly. She wants a relationship with her father so badly. And he's just, there's something wrong. Jamie was also 23 years old, I believe, and she just knew that this relationship was with her father, and dealing with him was just not something that she could carry with her for the rest of her life. In that meeting, her dad tells her, quote, you are extremely brave. And she responds with, quote, no, I just loved you. Which is so sad. I have goosebumps because you can tell that she wanted to love him so badly. After meeting with him that time, Jamie made up her mind that she would never, ever in a million years let him be a part of her life again. Jamie Lee is now a mother. She is healing. She's working on herself, and she has spoken out about her story publicly multiple times. And I'll end this video with a quote from her that I find fitting. Quote, sometimes I just want to go back in time and hug myself. My goal with sharing my story has always been to make people realize and believe that anyone can make it, no matter where they come from, no matter how broken they are. If you suffer from PTSD, if you suffer from trauma, I believe that everyone on this earth can get out of any darkness. Yeah, it's horrible. That is all from me today. Let me know if you've heard of this case before. And yeah, thank you for spending time with me today. Hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
Imagine just living your entire life and then finding out when you're an adult that you've been a missing person for over 40 years. This is the case of baby Holly, who disappeared when she was like a year old and then was found alive over 40 years later. Her parents, Dean and Tina Klaus, met when they were 15 and 19 years old. They married quickly, married young, and less than a year after they were married, their daughter, baby Holly, was born. Shortly before Dean met his wife, Tina, he belonged to a religious group. He did end up leaving this group before he married Tina and had his daughter, Holly. But this will be important later because this religious group is actually something that starts with the letter C and ends in ULT. Dean, Tina, and their daughter Holly ended up leaving their family in Florida to move to Dallas, Texas because Dean had gotten this great new job. They drove Dean's mother's car to Texas. They were 21 and 17 years old, still really young with a new baby, but they seemed really happy in their new life. And Tina would frequently send letters to their families back in Florida, updating them on their lives, sending photos of baby Holly. But in October of 1980, those letters would suddenly stop. Their families were definitely worried, but try not to panic too much. But that would all change only a few months later when Dean's mother got a random phone call from a woman who called herself Sister Susan. She told Dean's mother that Dean and Tina had joined a religious group and they would be giving away all of their possessions. So she offered to give Dean's mother back the car that they had driven to Texas in exchange for $1,000. Now this is weird, and I'm sure you guys are thinking that this is kind of a weird thing, but Dean had joined one of these groups before, so his mother did agree to go meet Sister Susan to get her car back. So she met Sister Susan in a parking lot at midnight of all times. You can definitely tell that people weren't, as aware of stranger danger back in the 1980s. Sister Susan met up with Dean's mother in the parking lot. She also had a group of people with her, but none of them were Dean, Tina, or baby Holly. But as more and more time passed and neither Dean's family or Tina's family were hearing from them, they definitely got more and more worried. They did try to report Dean, Tina, and Holly as missing people, but this was not taken seriously because it all kind of checked out that they joined this religious group. He had done it before, and then she did get her car back. But what their families did not know when they tried to report their loved ones missing is that Dean and Tina's body had already been found. In January of 1981, so around the exact same time that Dean's mother was getting her car back from Sister Susan, Dean and Tina's bodies were found 250 miles outside of Dallas, so like 250 miles away from where they lived. They were found in a rural area outside of Houston in the woods. They had both been tragically unalived, and it appeared that Dean passed away trying to protect his wife Tina. But the investigators somehow did not make a connection between these two bodies that were found and then the missing Dean and Tina. So they were listed as Jane and John Doe, and they would not be identified for 40 years. 40 years with no answers. Their loved ones lived 4 decades never knowing what happened of Dean and Tina. It wasn't until very recently in 2021 that they found out that Dean and Tina had been gone the entire time. Those genealogy sites like Ancestry.com and 23andMe? Well, one of Dean's distant relatives put his DNA in one of those sites, and that's how they finally identified that Dean and Tina were the Jane and John Doe. They called their families to break the news that their loved ones had been, gone for 40 years. And that's when they're like, hey, well, what happened to their baby? Where is their baby? The investigators on the other line are shocked. They had no idea that their Jane and John Doe that they've had for 40 years had a baby, and they were supposed to be looking for a baby. Baby Holly had been missing for 40 years, and no one even knew that she was a missing person. So they ended up doing the same thing that they did to find out that Dean and Tina were their Jane and John Doe, and by a stroke of luck, they found baby Holly still alive on June 7th, 2022, which coincidentally would have been her father, Dean's 63rd birthday. She was a 42-year-old woman. She was a mother of 5 with 2 grandchildren. Could you even imagine being in your 40s and finding out that your parents were unalived and you've been a missing person for 40 years? So all the way back in the 80s, baby Holly was dropped off at a church in Arizona by a group of barefooted women in white robes that said that they belonged to a religious group. The woman had Holly's birth certificate. They gave that to the church. They also gave them a note that was allegedly written by Dean and Tina waiving the parental rights of baby Holly. Well, the pastor that belonged to the church that baby Holly was dropped off at, him and his wife had been praying for a long time for a little baby. So they ended up adopting baby Holly. They gave her a wonderful life. They had absolutely nothing to do with, the disappearance and the deaths of Dean and Tina. They were great people. Holly says that her father was her hero in all of this. Holly was reunited with her biological family, but she obviously wants answers about what happened to her biological parents, Dean and Tina. The religious group has been identified as Christ's family, and they're definitely a C word that ends in ULT. But, the investigation still is ongoing. But this happened all the way in the 80s, and a lot of the group members that, were in the religious group at the time have unfortunately passed away. So it's been really, really hard for them to get answers. But I'm definitely still, hoping out, in my heart that there will be some answers for this poor family. I'm definitely interested to read all of your guys' thoughts, theories, questions, opinions on this case in the comments. While you're in the comments, definitely let me know what case you'd want to see me cover next. And I love you guys so much, and I'll see you tomorrow.
So I just came across this video. And it really creeped me out because it is terrifying when this happens, but also because it reminds me of the real disappearance of Cynthia Anderson. Cynthia mysteriously disappeared in 1981, but in the years leading up to her disappearance, she had recurring nightmares that she was abducted and murdered. She would wake up in a cold sweat after dreaming that someone broke into her home, and then days or even weeks later, she would have the same dream, but it would result in her being kidnapped and killed. I don't know what this phenomenon is called or if it's like a premonition, but after Cynthia was plagued by these dreams, she did in fact disappear, and nobody knows what happened to her. Absolutely nothing about this case adds up, and there is seemingly no plausible explanation. But let's talk about it. This is Cynthia Anderson. She lived in Toledo, Ohio with her family, and by all accounts, life was pretty normal. The Anderson family was super religious, and everyone in Cynthia's inner circle was also religious, including her boyfriend Jeff. The two were really happy together. Cynthia was described as a really shy girl, but she also had a lot of friends and was someone you could always rely on. Fast forward to 1980. Although things in Cynthia's life were going really well, she began having these terrifying and recurring dreams about someone kidnapping and killing her. It was always a stranger breaking in and taking her, but these dreams would just not stop. It scared Cynthia so bad that she began telling her mom and sister about them. Like, she was genuinely so scared and didn't know why she was having them. After a while, they stopped, which she was really thankful for, and she tried to continue on with her life like normal. In 1981, Cynthia began working at a local law firm as a legal secretary, and she really enjoyed it. But that summer, she decided that she was going to leave her job and attend a Bible college with her boyfriend. She was sad to be leaving her job, but she was also really looking forward to this next chapter of her life. She only had 2 more weeks of work, and then she would be off. But little did she, or anyone for that matter, know that her nightmares were about to become true, and she would never get a chance to leave. On August 4th, 1981, Cynthia went to work like normal. She would always be the first one in the office, as all of the lawyers scheduled morning meetings in town. And then once those were done, they would typically make their way into the office late morning or early afternoon. That morning was no different. The office janitor saw Cynthia at her desk at around 9:30 that morning, and then some people walking outside in the shopping plaza near the office saw her sitting at her desk at 9:45. But by 10 a.m., calls were coming into the office, yet Cynthia wasn't answering. The calls would just ring and ring. So within 15 minutes, something happened to Cynthia, but no one would know until about noon that day. This is when 2 of the lawyers working at the firm arrived at the office. Their names are Jim Rabbit and Jay Feldstein, and when they walked up to the building, they found that the front door was locked, as it usually was. Like I said, Cynthia was usually alone for hours at a time in the office, so as a security measure, she always kept the front door locked. All the lights were on too, so it really seemed like they were going to walk in and find Cynthia there like usual. But as they unlocked the door and went inside, they yelled for Cynthia, and they got no response. So they started looking around for her, but she was nowhere to be found. Everything in the office looked normal, like nothing looked out of place or anything like that. So initially, they weren't too worried, but then they started hearing the phone ring, which sent off an immediate red flag. Usually, if Cynthia had to step away from the office for any reason at all, she would always place the phones on hold. Yet for some reason, on this day, this wasn't done. Then the lawyers made their way to Cynthia's Cynthia's desk, and another thing stood out as extremely frightening to them. There on her desk was a romance novel that she had been reading, but the book was opened to a very specific page. In fact, it was the only violent part or page in the book, and it detailed how the main character was abducted at knife point. One of the lawyers said that when he read this, his stomach immediately sank and shivers ran down his spine. With no sign of what happened to Cynthia or any way to get a hold of her, they called the police. When authorities arrived, they examined the scene, but it was really eerie because there was no sign of a struggle at all. Nothing was out of place or disturbed, and there was no sign of forced entry into the building. Other than Cynthia herself being missing, so were her purse and car keys. But the odd part is that her car was still there and parked right in front of the office. Police conducted a small search, but it was like Cynthia vanished into thin air. There was no trace of her or what happened to her at all. Her bank account wasn't touched after she disappeared, which was bizarre because there was a good amount of money in it, and her social security number never showed up for any other place of employment or anything like that. But then, two things were discovered that made this case even more disturbing. So we already know about the dreams that Cynthia was having before she disappeared, which is already creepy enough. But then, a client at the law firm came forward with some pretty unsettling information. His name was Larry Mullins, and he was actually in the law firm the day before Cynthia disappeared, paying off some legal fees. And he saw Cynthia. While he was there, Cynthia got a phone call, and although he doesn't know what was said on the other end of the line, it apparently scared Cynthia so bad that she immediately hung up. Larry said it seemed like the person on the other end of the line said something super obscene, and Cynthia looked terrified. He said even weeks after she disappeared that he still remembered the look on her face. When Larry went home that day, he said that he was so concerned for Cynthia that he actually called the non-emergency line, and he asked the police to do a little drive-by to make sure that she was okay. I'm not sure if they ever did or not, but this witness statement seemed to bring up even more terrifying situations that had happened in the past. So Cynthia's employer, Richard Neller, who was also a lawyer, said that in the months leading up to her disappearance, Cynthia began receiving a lot of threatening phone calls at work. Although these phone calls were creepy, nobody really took them seriously at first because they thought that they were just prank phone calls. And Cynthia never disclosed what the calls actually said, just that they spooked her. Cynthia's desk in the office had a view of the sidewalk, and this specific area was a small little shopping center or plaza with a lot of other businesses. There was even a bus stop right in front of the law office. So there were so many people walking by outside that could easily see Cynthia if they looked. So initially it seemed like these threatening phone calls could just be someone who spotted Cynthia who was walking by outside on the street. Regardless, she got so scared that she started locking the doors every time she was alone. And the law firm also installed a little alert button at her desk. So if there were ever any trouble in the office, Cynthia could press this button and it would alert the business next door. So with this new information coming to light, it was a real possibility to police that Cynthia may have been abducted. And then they stumbled across something in an alley near the office. There was large graffiti on the wall and it read, quote, "I love you, Cindy." End quote. At first, this seemed like it could really be connected to Cynthia's disappearance, but according to reports, this was proved to be unrelated. I guess this graffiti was written by a man named Greg who lived nearby, and he wrote it to his then girlfriend, Cindy Burrs. Greg later passed away in a car accident, but Cindy B confirmed this to be true and completely unrelated to Cynthia's disappearance. But then, 1 month after Cynthia disappeared, a call came in that turned this investigation upside down. A woman called the police and told them that Cynthia was being held in the basement of a white house in the north end of town. The woman said she was scared and talking in a low whisper, and she kept saying that she had to go. The officer who took the call begged her to stay on the line and to give them more information, like an exact address or something, but the woman hung up. She called back a few minutes later though and gave some more information. She said there were 2 houses side by side owned by the same family. She said the entire family was out of town except for one of the sons, and it was this son who was holding Cynthia captive in the basement. Then she hung up once again. Police combed street after street and every house on the north end of town that matched this description, but they never found anything. Nothing at all to back up this woman's claims. So once again, this case fell cold, and to this day, there are no real answers. Cynthia has never been found, and her disappearance remains unsolved. And although we don't know what exactly happened to her, we do have a few theories. Theory number 1 is that she just ran away to start a new life, that her disappearance was staged by her. Some people think that Cynthia wanted to step away from her religion religion. She never mentioned anything about that, but religion was basically her entire life. And she was just about to quit a job that she absolutely loved to go to Bible college with her boyfriend. Some people think that she just didn't want this life for her, so she ran away to start a new one. One of the biggest points of contention in this case is her book being open on her desk to a page that was violent and about a kidnapping. Some people think this kind of indicates that Cynthia walked away on her own accord. One reason being is that this kind of just feels super cinematic, and a kidnapper likely would not take the time to do this, especially if they didn't even know what the book was about. How would they know to find that exact page? It just seems unrealistic. On the other hand, Cynthia did know what the book was about, and she knew exactly how much time she had alone in the office before all of her coworkers were to come back. Some people think that her dreams and these threatening phone calls were a way of setting the scene. It's been reported that the only person who actually witnessed Cynthia receive a threatening call was that client, Larry Mullins. Everyone else only heard about it from Cynthia after the fact. For the record, I don't think she staged any of this, especially with how scared she seemed. And with this narrative regarding these threatening phone calls and if she actually received them or not, I feel like it feels a little bit victim blamey, and I just don't want to do that. But another reason why people feel that Cynthia could have staged her own disappearance is because shortly before she vanished, her dad said that she was overly concerned with the way she looked. Like she was super focused on her hair, makeup, and all of that, which she never previously was. Some people think that if she was secretly unhappy in her life, maybe she met someone that nobody knew about and wanted to start a new life with them. And on top of this, some people even think that the woman who called the police and said that she was being held in a basement was Cynthia herself, and that she was whispering because she didn't want anyone to hear her real voice. I mean, this could make sense considering the woman wouldn't provide any helpful information like a real address, but I don't know. If Cynthia did plan her disappearance and run away, I do acknowledge that back then it would have been easier to pull this off, especially without the technology we have today to locate someone, and the fact that there was a bus stop right in front of her work. But again, I just don't know. This seems a bit too far-fetched for me. Plus, it would be really hard to live the rest of your life under a new identity without ever being found. Theory number 2 was that Cynthia was met with foul play somehow. Although there weren't any signs of a struggle, maybe she was abducted and killed by someone she knew. Playing into this theory is the fact that 14 years after her disappearance, a huge local drug trafficking ring was busted. A total of 9 people were indicted on these charges, and one of those people was Richard Neller, Cynthia's old employer, who was also a lawyer. Also charged was a man named Jose Rodriguez Jr. He was a client of Richard's at the time that Cynthia was working at the law office, right before she disappeared. As part of this trial, a witness, who also happened to be another inmate, confessed something that shocked authorities. The witness said that before Cynthia disappeared, Richard was working on a case for Jose, and it did not end well. He got charged with something harsher than he thought, which really pissed him off. He suggested that Jose killed Cynthia as retaliation for not handling his case well. How true that is, I'm not sure, because it's a well-known fact that inmates like to give false confessions and information to help their own case. This happens, unfortunately, all the time. And this lead was investigated, but no concrete evidence was ever found backing it up. Plus, why wait 14 years to confess something like this? Although it is very odd and suspicious that Cynthia's former boss was arrested for criminal activity, to this day there's never been any official connection between the two cases. Just speculation and theories. So there aren't really any good explanations as to what happened to Cynthia. She just disappeared off the face of the earth, literally within a 15-minute time frame. Some think that her dreams may have been premonitions, like visions as to what was to come, but I don't know. It's just weird though how people can have dreams that pick up from where they left off, even weeks or years later, and how in this case, her dreams came true. But it's now been 45 years, and whatever happened to Cynthia inside that office remains a mystery.
She turned her own son into a killer, but he would turn on her years later. Sante Kimes was born Sandra Louise Walker in Oklahoma on the 24th of July, 1934. She's also known as Dragon Lady. A lot of people refer to her as that. I'll let you decide if you want to do that or not. Her childhood was reportedly quite troubled. She was said to have shown signs of pyromania and would sometimes torture her siblings with fire, so that is a brilliant start. In 1960, she moved to Las Vegas and she quickly built up a criminal record. She was arrested for crimes including petty theft, auto theft, larceny, and fraud-related offences as well. In the early 1970s, Sante met wealthy motel owner and millionaire Kenneth Kimes Sr. They went on to have a son together as well. They named him Kenneth Kimes Jr. and he was born in March 1975. Sante and Kenneth Sr. married in 1981. Despite being married to a literal millionaire, Sante continued committing crimes. In 1985, Sante and Kenneth Sr. were arrested for enslaving
and abusing maids in their home. Kenneth Sr. died in 1994, and Sante continued running a number of scams and increasingly involved her son, Kenneth Jr. By the late 1990s, Sante and Kenneth Jr. were wanted in multiple states for arson, fraud, and suspected murder. They were linked to several disappearances and several different killings. One of the most infamous was Irene Silverman. Irene was an 82-year-old wealthy New York socialite and widow. She had no children, and she was said to be a very lonely woman. She rented rooms in her Manhattan townhouse for company more than money. She just wanted somebody there. In the summer of 1998, she rented one room to a quiet young man who called himself Manny. He often hid his face from the security cameras. He would cover himself up quite a lot, and sometimes he was seen sneaking in an older woman. In case you haven't guessed yet, Manny turns out to be Kenneth Jr., and the elderly woman that he's sneaking in is Sante. Just weeks after moving in with Irene in this rented room, she vanished on the 5th of July in 1998. But the same day that Irene was reported missing, those two were also missing. They completely disappeared. Later, Kenneth would go on to tell authorities that he tackled Irene in her bedroom while Sante turned up the TV to drown out the noise. He then went on to strangle her. Her body was allegedly loaded into a car and dumped at a construction site in northern New Jersey, and her remains have actually never been found. Sante and Kenneth Jr. were arrested in New York on an unrelated warrant for writing a bad check to a car dealer, and inside the car, the police found guns, wigs, a rape drug, a notebook containing plans, Irene's personal belongings, her keys, and a forged deed to her townhouse. So clearly, this linked them to Irene. Investigators soon discovered that the pair were also wanted in the Bahamas, Nevada, and California. In the Bahamas, they were suspects in the 1996 disappearance of banker Syed Bilal Ahmed. This 46-year-old man managed Sante's offshore bank accounts, and he vanished after having dinner with her and her son. Then there was 63-year-old David Kasdin, who was a businessman. Sante had allegedly forged his signature to secure a 6-figure loan, and when he discovered this fraud, prosecutors say that she sent her son, Kenneth Jr., to kill him. David's body was found in a dumpster near LAX airport in March 1998. Sante and Kenneth Jr. were also linked to the 1991 disappearance of a lawyer named Elmer Holmgren. Police believe that Elmer helped Sante commit arson for insurance money. When authorities began investigating, he vanished during a trip with Sante and Kenneth. In 2000, Sante and Kenneth Jr. stood trial in New York for Irene Silverman's murder. Both were convicted and sentenced to around 120 years in prison. In 2001, they were extradited to Los Angeles for the trial of David Kasdin's murder. That trial began in 2004. Sante and Kenneth had remained loyal to each other for years, covering for each other, backing each other up, backing up each other's stories. But during the trial, Kenneth Jr. would turn on his mum and say that she pushed him and coerced him into all of these crimes. So he gave some really damning evidence about his own mother, and she was absolutely furious. It was during this trial that he pled guilty in exchange for avoiding the death penalty for both him and his mum. He then obviously went on to give a lot of evidence against Sante, and he admitted to himself killing Irene Silverman, David Kasdin, and Syed Bilal Ahmed. And he went on to say that Sante, years earlier, had killed Elmer Holmgren with a hammer. Sante denied involvement in all of the murders and accused the police of mishandling the case, but she was convicted again and sentenced to life without parole for David Kasdin's murder. After her California conviction, Sante was returned to a New York prison to continue serving her sentence there, and she died of natural causes in 2014 at the age of 79. Kenneth Jr. is still serving life in prison at a facility in San Diego. He later said, "I absolutely regret my past."